Well, that certainly didn't end the way I expected it to. But transit in Philadelphia is safe. Hooray! But not in the way that I think a lot of us would have wanted, and a way that's still pissing off a lot of people. They did the meme. They just did the meme again. It remains undefeated. I know there's a lot to unpack with the new paradigm of transit in Philadelphia, so let's talk about it, shall we?
Hey everybody, it's Steve here, and oh boy have things changed quite a bit with the SEPTA funding crisis situation and the Pennsylvania transit crisis situation. So it very much is a case of good news and bad news now. The good news, the very good news, is that these transit services, SEPTA and PRT particularly, are now safe for 2 years. They have been given funding to both restore operations that were cut back in the initial wave of cuts and to also keep the services going as is for the next 2 years. The bad side of things is where that money is coming from and what that could imply for transit in Philadelphia over the course of those next 2 years. Okay, so let's just get into a little bit of a recap about how we got into this position. If you watched my first 2 videos on this topic, I got links to them down below, of course, if you want to get up to speed. But after mid-July, the Pennsylvania legislature is still very much in deadlock about the budget. And even now, a whole 2.5 months after it was supposed to have passed, it was supposed to be done by June 30th, at least supposedly constitutionally speaking. But if you recall in the last video I made where I talked about my experiences being out in Harrisburg and talking to some of the staffers there, they never expected it to actually be done. This was something that had happened multiple times before with a divided legislative branch of government. So for those that don't know, both branches of the legislature in Pennsylvania are split in terms of their party control. The Democrats control the House, the Republicans control the Senate, and that naturally leads to a lot of infighting about what should be funded and what should not, and how much one should get. And this was really taken to another level on this go around, especially when it came to public transit, which, thanks to the advocates out there, which I'm sure a lot of you watching out there are, you got public transit to be one of, if not the biggest talking point amongst the legislators in Harrisburg. That really is going to showing just how serious people are taking this and how loud a voice we have raised about it. But even then, it has still led to a lot of gamesmanship, especially since Republicans who have historically not been as kind, at least in recent years, to funding mass transit services. Instead, because they tend to have a more rural constituency, they tend to focus more on rural issues, such as, in transportation's case, it would be roadworks. So that led to a lot of ridiculous stuff going back and forth about like different priorities of what people want to get out of this. And it all came to a head about a month ago when the PA Senate was finally called back into session to get the issue of mass transit squared away and also the budget in general. It has since not led to a budget being passed. It's still a problem now, even with this issue temporarily resolved. They were called back into session to vote on the bill, and in fact, a 5th bill. I mentioned the 4 bills that had gone through the House successfully and landed on the Senate's docket. They passed a 5th one that was more generous to what the Republicans were looking for. And the Republicans and the Senate did in fact pass a transit bill. The problem was where they would get the money from, and it's still kind of an issue today, though less so. So instead of raising funds from sources like a proposed tax on skill games, as they call it, which is for like the kind of gambling machines you see in bars and restaurants, things of that sort. Instead of getting it from that, or for getting it from other sources like marijuana, for instance, which for some reason they're not touching, it would have come directly from money that would have likely been allocated already from the Pennsylvania Public Transit Trust Fund. Now, that Transit Trust Fund it's a fund, naturally, and it's meant to be applied for emergency situations with transit agencies and also for infrastructure projects. From what I understand, it's about $2 billion currently in there right now, and a good amount of that money is already allocated to public transit projects in Pennsylvania. A lot of it for SEPTA, some of it for PRT in Pittsburgh, and I'm sure some of it would have gone elsewhere. I personally haven't had much of a chance to look too much into what is allocated and what is not, but what I do know from the situation is that a lot of money is already allocated to those projects, but the Senate's bill was indiscriminate. It may have given them the money that was needed for SEPTA. About $300 million was given to agencies statewide, which would have helped them for the coming year. But where the money was coming from was a big problem, and it still really is, and I'll get into that in a sec. So when that went back to the House, because it had to go back to the House because it was so radically changed, both the House and a lot of transit advocacy groups saw it as a poison pill move, and the House rejected it outright. And the day they rejected it was really the last real day that could have been had to get it passed. And that led to the first round of cuts going through at SEPTA particularly. So what those first cuts entailed was 32 bus routes were eliminated. It was a 20% cut to service in general. 32 bus routes were cut. Several others were cut back. Other services saw a reduction in frequencies, including the rapid transit lines. The Market Frankfurt line saw headways go from every 6 minutes to every 8 minutes, which was really bad for that service. Like 2 minutes doesn't seem much, but on a rapid transit line, that's a lot of capacity lost. And on the Broad Street line, you still had express services, but the sports expresses for like big games down at the sports arenas on Pattison Avenue in South Philly, that was gone. And it was only brought back for one day, in fact, and that was for the home opener for the Eagles. And that was brought because of a donation from, I believe it was DraftKings. It was from one of those sports gambling websites, which is incredibly ironic to me. If that doesn't just say how chaotic things could have been, that is just ridiculous. But to SEPTA's credit, once that funding was given to them, that night went off without a hitch. So that is really, really good. And thankfully, they're going to be bringing that back. So for anyone who's going down to the stadiums for a game at some point, you will be able to get a Sports Express service again. So that really helps you really speed up the trip time going from South Philly to Center City quite a bit, especially if you're coming from the suburbs and you're taking regional rail. And so those cuts went into effect, and yeah, like it was already like really, really rough for a lot of people. The school district in Philadelphia reported a massive drop in on-time attendance because a lot of students ride SEPTA buses to go to school. And not only did it make it worse for people commuting to and from work, it made it rough for students. It made it rough for people traveling to the shops, going to doctor's appointments. Like, this was genuinely uprooting for a lot of people. This was horrible for a lot of people, and it would have been worse if the second round of cuts would have gone through on January 1st. So that that whole chaos in turn led to the unexpected saving grace, I guess you could say, about SEPTA in general. And it came not in the form of a bill passed in Harrisburg, but from a lawsuit in Philadelphia. 2 lawsuits, actually. So, not long after the cuts went into effect, SEPTA was sued twice. Now, the first one of those lawsuits was, to be blunt about it, it was bullshit. It was a frivolous lawsuit that was passed by a rather controversial law agency that basically said that SEPTA was making it up. And yeah, like, they was making up the funding crisis. And addressing it in any serious detail, I think, would be an insult to my dignity. So that one, we knew that one was never going to go anywhere because everyone else was smart enough for that. But the one that really got the ball rolling was a much more understandable case. It was ordered in, and it led to a court order issued on September 4th in the Common Pleas Court that said that SEPTA must halt the service cuts, including the route eliminations and like every elimination, every curfew, every truncation that was considered, including the ones that had already taken place a week prior. And the court sided with the plaintiffs on this matter. The plaintiffs were arguing that SEPTA's service cuts would disproportionately impact minority and economically disadvantaged communities, which I personally agree with. And not just for the fact that these the routes that were cut were specifically hurting minority and economically underprivileged communities, and I'm certain they did. And I've yet to really dive too much into the details of which ones would have hurt them the most, but it's more so the fact that transit cuts, no matter where they are, hurt everybody of all economic positions, of all ethnicities, what have you. It hurts everybody, like, and them all the more so. And like, getting rid of it, especially on such a scale, would certainly hurt these people, and I definitely understand it. So the Common Pleas Court sided with the plaintiffs, and they issued essentially an injunction to and force SEPTA to reinstate services that had been cut back. And at the time I'm going to be releasing this video, it will be the day that those services return, September 14th. So the day you're watching this video, the services that were lost are being returned, and I'm very happy about that. The problem ultimately stemmed from the fact that, sure, the court can order it. They had the power to do that, but they did not have the power to actually give SEPTA money to continue running the services, and especially beyond a temporary, temporary time frame going into the new year and beyond. And as we've seen recently, there has been really no movement on the budget so far. And these lawsuits, the lawsuit really forced both SEPTA and PRT's hands on this. And they had to turn to essentially a better version of the poison pill idea. And they reached out to PennDOT, they reached out to the Secretary of Transportation, and they requested that some of the money from the Transit Trust Fund be used for running operations, and they got enough funding to run for the next 2 years. Well, almost enough funding, and that's where the fare increase comes into play. So the fare increase would cover the remaining lost money that the trust fund would not be able to cover. So that's why you're seeing the bus and rapid transit fares go up from $250 to $290. And the regional rail fares will also be increased as well. I'll probably put a table of that in this video if I could find it. So that has, for the time being, saved public transit in Philadelphia, and later on Pittsburgh also put out a request as well, and they're getting money too, which is good. I really want to see Pittsburgh succeed as well as Philadelphia. And actually, one question mark that came up to me was the public transit in the third biggest city in the state, which is Allentown. Allentown's transit system, Lanta, is also facing a budget deficit too, and I'm wondering if they are reaching out for the same sort of lifeline at the moment. I'll definitely put up an article about that if I can find it. I'll definitely be digging around for it after I record this. So that leaves us back to the whole problem of like what's going to happen to public transit 2 years down the line, because where they're getting this money is from the transit trust fund that's supposed to be covering infrastructure upgrades. To be fair, the trust fund does have a section of it segregated for operations funding, but the problem there is, from what I've seen, that side of the trust fund has not really gained much ground, whereas the Capital One has. And that leads to a question: will this impact the stuff that the infrastructure projects that SEPTA already has money earmarked for? The answer to that is no. The ones that have money allocated to them, like the new cars on the Market Frankfurt line, from what I understand, the trolleys that they're getting from Alstom, that's not been affected. They haven't been affected. The rapid transit stuff hasn't been affected either. And certain stuff that already has money earmarked from the trust fund, that will not be affected. The money that was taken was unallocated. But this means that for the next 2 years in their capital budget, SEPTA will likely be forced to really pick and choose what money goes into what. And I really don't think this was helped at all by the fact that in the midst of all of this on the regional rail system, another car fire happened on one of the Silverliner 4s. I made a post about one of them that happened on the Wilmington Newark line a couple of months ago, and now a second one caught fire. These are 50-year-old rail cars that needed replacement like 10 years ago, I would argue. I always have a soft spot for the Silverliner 4s, but they're well past their sell-by date, and this is showing. And this led to a ton of the 4s taken out of service. And while the frequencies remained roughly the same during this period, you saw incredibly short trains using whatever Silverliner 4s were deemed in the best condition, and all of the Silverliner 5s, as many Silverliner 5s as you possibly can. You may have even seen it in one of my recent videos where you had like dinky little 2 and 3 car trains compared to the normal 4, 5, or 6 cars. And thankfully for that, it seems like a lot of the 4s have been checked and they're back in service. And I'm hoping that they hold well for, they're going to have to hold well for a few years yet, especially since this funding really does put into question the Silverliner 6 project, which is what they want to do to replace the 4s down the line. I really don't have much concrete news on that whole front, especially like even after my talks that I had with my conductor friend who works at SEPTA, who I did an interview with for a video about nearly 2 years ago. Jeez. So I haven't heard much movement on that front, and this is likely not going to help. So it really is going to leave the infrastructure side of things in a state of when will things go wrong, perhaps, if and when. Like more so than they already have been in some regards. And I can imagine the same is true in Pittsburgh, especially since, frankly, from what I saw of PRT, their leadership really hasn't been taking the bull by the horns as much as SEPTA's leadership has. SEPTA, especially to Scott Sauer, the GM of SEPTA, to his credit, he has been like putting himself into the whole conversation. He's been fighting tooth and nail for this. PRT, to my knowledge anyway, a lot of people, like if you're from Pittsburgh, feel free to tell me if the leadership has been this vocal, but I have not seen it. PRT's leadership seems a lot more passive about it. And in fact, from what I heard, the funding even if the best case scenario happened and you had a transit bill passed, PRT was still seeing themselves as not having enough money in the best case scenario, and they would have cut service too, even if the best case scenario happened, which just to me screams of Like, frankly, if it's true, it screams of cowardice. Like, it just sounds to me like PRT are just rolling over and playing dead in this case, which is the worst thing you could possibly do. I desperately want to be proven wrong on this, though. So if anyone from Pittsburgh can prove me otherwise, tell me. Tell me, because I want to be wrong. So, that being said, where does that leave us? So for 2 years, it seems to have kept a degree of stability. It's still not the firmest foundation, but you still have, like, you have now time to work with, time to really push the issue on your elected officials, because the transit advocacy groups are out there. The ones that I've shouted out in my last 2 videos, they are not quitting. This is not over for them, because this, and in the words of everybody involved in this, is a Band-Aid solution. Even Scott Sauer has straight up said that this is a Band-Aid, and a lot of representatives and senators are saying the same. So that means that we really need to kick things, like keep up the pressure on these people. And if the best case scenario happens and we do get a budget that sees an increase in public transit funding, like, that's the best thing I want to see. I want to see us get that point, so we don't have to pick and choose in the capital funding realm. So keep up the pressure on them. Again, I will leave links to every one of the key senators to pester about this, to get them to realize that, hey, like, yeah, this is not going to let up, because we know this is a Band-Aid solution. This is not permanent. We want a permanent funding mechanism for public transit, so we don't have to keep coming back to this every year or every 2 or 5 years. We want it to be something that is accepted. And that in turn leads me to my whole, like, what I want to do for, not just for these groups, but also for my channel. Because the more I've gone through this, the more I'm thinking to myself that that the public transit argument seems to be a case of haves and have-nots fighting each other, and therefore not really coming to an understanding of why this is important, and like what can be done. And therefore, what I want to research into, alongside all the other stuff I'm doing, of course, my next video is not going to be about transit in Philly. It's going to be something different. I'll be hinting at that in a bit. But one thing I definitely want to look into is finding ways to bring everybody together, as many people as you can on this argument, and make it so that people that don't exactly like funding public transit will either, at best, they accept it as something necessary, or they would be extremely reticent to be against it. And I'm cobbling together an idea that I have in mind. I have the broad idea of it basically together. Not quite sure if I'm ready to say just yet, but it's pretty bold, if I'm honest, about like how you can build that consensus and really, like, improve public transit where it already exists, improve the agencies that are already out there, and build out what I think public transit ought to strive for in Pennsylvania and what it really can be, because there is, like, ungodly potential. Like, there's ungodly potential in the state. Even in the middle of, like, Appalachia, there's a lot of potential out there. The more I look into this, it's like, why are we not considering this? Why are we not bold enough in our vision for this? And it's not just for Philadelphia. It's not just for Pittsburgh. It's not just for Allentown or Erie or Harrisburg or Lancaster. It's for the entire state, because as the main group that I've been talking to a lot is the group Transit for All PA, and I really admire their mission. I really like those guys, and I want to take that mission to heart, Transit for All PA, and I really want to expand on that much further in these coming years, so that when we do get to mid 2027, which is when the budget crisis would come to a head again if nothing is done, so that we have a vision in mind to tell these politicians that this is what public transit can be. It can be fantastic. It can be one of the biggest generators of wealth and community pride in the state, in both cities, suburbs, small towns, and rural places, because they all could be great with it. Like, there's a lot of potential out there. And I know what I'm thinking is some years out, quite a lot of years out, possibly at this rate. But it's something that leaves a little bit of a nugget in your mind of what it could possibly be. Because frankly, I don't think a lot of people are ambitious enough. I don't think a lot of visions for transit are ambitious enough in a lot of places, in the US particularly. And I want to be ambitious, but I also want to be realistic too. And that's why I'm not quite ready yet to lay out my entire plan just yet. So give that some time, and I'll definitely be laying out my thoughts on the matter in the coming months, maybe even the coming year. But in the meantime, folks, I want as many of you out there to make it known again to politicians that what we have helps for sure, but it's not the end. It's not the end game here. We're not going to be just lying down on this. We're going to keep pestering you. We are going to keep saying, hey, it's a band-aid for a situation that requires a tourniquet. Where is the tourniquet? And that's what I want you to keep doing. Again, I'll have links to all the major advocacy groups that I have seen in the description below, and also a list of the senators and representatives and of course Governor Shapiro's office, that I would say is highly, highly, highly worth looking into. So I would definitely suggest you keep up the good fight, keep pestering the politicians, and make them realize that, hey, like, we're not just sitting down at this. We're gonna keep getting at it.
But whilst we all work on that, it's time for me to start working on my next big video. What's it going to be about? Well, maybe this will give a hint. Oh, I've been waiting years for this.
So, yeah, I think you can pretty easily tell what my next video is going to be about with that one. So with that said, thank you all so much for your effort. We got to keep plugging at it. We have something that can keep things stable for the time being, but even in stability, we will not rest. We will keep fighting to make public transit not just as good as it is, but way better in a way that it should be. It should be a mark of pride for the entire state. And let's keep fighting, folks. Keep on fighting for the future of how we get around.